Fish and chips. There's nothing more sort of quintessentially British than that. It is available all up and down the country, and is very, very, very much so a staple of working class diets. It is the thing everyone goes out to get. For example, in Japan, over in Europe, sort of ramen is like a big thing. It's quite expensive. If you buy a bowl of ramen in a shop, or you go to something like Wagamama's, it's sort of quite expensive. But if you go to Japan, it's relatively cheap. It's the working man's food. And I think every country, as I'm sure other people will tell me, will have sort of equivalents to that. It's the cheap, really easy, quick food you can go out and get. And certainly in the UK, that is fish and chips. And worryingly, of course, we're facing a cost of living crisis. We are having more and more problems with these, or at least certainly the fish and chip shops having, because of course people are choosing to spend less money. You've got energy costs because, again, those big fryers that they have cost a lot of energy to run. The price of oil has gone up, fish has gone up. All their basic ingredients have skyrocketed. So what are these, essentially these shops to do? I think you'll get a situation in the UK where very much the independent fish and chip shops will probably end up closing, where you will probably get the chains to survive. I think that is what's going to happen. And even then, maybe there's a question about how many of those sort of the big chains we have in the UK of selling fish and chips might keep locations open. They might just decide, well, we're going to just scale back a couple of these locations. That is entirely possible. But anyway, we're going to go diving more into this article and more about what is going on here in the fish and chip restaurant industry, I suppose. So, as always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee. We can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So over we go to The Guardian on this, with the title of "Quite a Few Have Just Given Up. Fish and chip shops battered by rising costs." If I were a panicker, I'd be very scared. Andrew Cook is putting on a very brave face, but he's worried. He's the owner of Skipper's at Euston, the fish and chip shop near Chorley in Lancashire, and has already had to put his prices up 4 times this year. And he fears yet another increase is just around the corner as he battles with a tidal wave of rising costs and new pressures. The UK's fish and chip industry is now facing its biggest challenge in its 160-year history. And according to Crook, who specialises in the nation's beloved chippies as a president of the National Federation of Fish Fryers, each week, several fish and chip shops among his over 1,200 strong memberships are now going out of business. Crook says that they are being clobbered by rocketing fish and cooking oil prices, as well as the cost of energy required to fry the food. All that time when consumers are watching their spending more closely than ever. But there is no end in sight, and as restaurants and energy contracts end and they find themselves on the hook for much bigger bills. This week, one down the road from me closed. It opened 4 years ago, and they've decided enough's enough. With COVID, and then there's this, it's just too much, Crook said. With some which closed, the cheaper ones just couldn't show the price increase. Quite a few were just coming up to retirement and have just given up. The war in Ukraine has already had an impact on energy and raw material costs, and the lurking prices on the horizon for the government's much delayed introduction of the 35% tariffs on Russian white fish. Large quantities of the Russian white fish, such as cod, haddock, caught in the Barents Sea and the frozen instantly on board the factory ships, will make their way to customers' plates and takeaway shops, and fish suppers, or even supermarket fish fingers and even fillets. After the invasion of Ukraine, the European frozen food company Nomad Foods, which owns brands including Birdseye and Findus, told its shareholders that it was working to try and reduce its dependency on Russian white fish. However, the chief executive, Stefan Duschmacher, I hope I said that right, said the transition would not be quick. We are finding some ways to increase the purchase from outside of Russia. We're trying to work on the replacement in those terms of species like hake. Dushelmacher said the call with the analysis, adding that the company was also looking at farmed fish. It's not like you just switch on and off the light. You're talking about fish that you need to breed and obviously grow the fish. You need to make sure that you have the right quantity, he said. One solution for UK chippies could be Norway, which shares rights to the fish and plentiful grounds of the Bering Straits with Russia. Last week, Crook travelled to Norway to ask for increased supplies at a conference arranged by the country's whitefish industry. The sheer volume and the kind of fish required by chippies would make it hard for the UK or other nations to try and fill the gap. Crook said that he had made plans to the owners of the Norwegian vessels, but had been warned that, quote, the catching is quite bad. I've been trying not to panic my industry, but the biggest risk could be no fish, he said. I think the best case scenario is that we could see a further price rises, and we've just been trying to get my members to brace themselves for the shock. Chippies have been steadily increasing their prices, and at Cook's takeaway, the portion of fish and chips is now a quarter more expensive at £8.60. That than it was, of course, 4 months ago. And his members know they are walking a tightrope. We are taking, we're trying to cushion the blow for the customer. We've always been known as the cheap meal, and the vessel owners are trying to cushion us as much as they can because they want to preserve the industry. We are important to them, he said. And it's not just the chippies who are feeling the squeeze. Inflation itself is being felt across the entire fish and chip processing industry, especially when it comes to fuel for fishing boats. Operators up and down the country are weighing up whether it's even worth heading out to sea, as the higher prices received for their catches are now outstripped by their fuel costs for their boats. Certain fishing methods, it's reaching that kind of tipping point where fuel costs may be about 50 or even 60% the operational cost of the trip, said Darren Bates, the chief executive of the National Federation of Fishermen Organizations. When you reach that kind of tipping point, it's just a question mark of whether it's viable to continue fishing. I've had several calls this week from the coast to say that we're very close to that tipping point. Boats are even considering whether they have to even tie up for a while now. The NFTO said that it had been pleased with the case with the government after the fuel subsidies were given in recent weeks to French and Spanish fishermen by their governments. It creates an unequal playing field, they all said. If you don't catch and land fish, you simply don't have a supply chain. And so this is getting really serious now. And we've talked about a lot of this before, but I think a lot of that really ties up the situation. You've got fishermen, as we said there, you've got 50%, 60% your cost now going on fuel. Is it even worth going out to catch fish? And remember, I don't even think we're at the worst part of this crisis yet. I think the government's going to be very, very lucky that it has a, quote, warm summer. But the second the winter starts to roll in, and I think they're praying that it's going to be a long summer, at least, as long as it possibly can, because the second winter starts to set in, you're going to get a huge problem with, of course, heating, and those problems are going to set in. But most of these problems you see, especially with the fish and chip shop here, again, catching fish, most of that is down to Brexit because, again, we don't have access to waters. You saw, French and Spanish fishermen have got subsidies for their fuel. Where's the British government stepping in to help the British fishermen? Well, as we've always said, the government doesn't care. It really doesn't. It may sound like it cares one moment, or even, Nigel Farage might come out and say, oh my God, the British fishermen are getting a raw deal. But of course, after 2016, Nigel just didn't even care. And I was warning about that from years ago. Nigel is not the fisherman's friend. He never really was. You were just a useful tool to him, fisherman, unfortunately. And of course, that's where we are now, unfortunately. And it looks like a lot of these chains and even these shops are set to close down. And that will be a sad moment for a lot of people, I think. So, but as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and an notification link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all.